First of all, I'd like to thank Cleveland State University, the administration that actually funds this. That's kind of a nice thing. They spend their money on nice social needs for our department every now and then. And you know, we're a sponsor of the local heroes at the festival, and part of our deal is we have these moderated panel discussions with our esteemed colleagues here that are willing to share knowledge with you, and that's a really great thing that we have here. And it doesn't just happen by them throwing money at it. Our department puts a lot of time into this. I'd like to especially thank Kim Neundorfer. She's shy, she'll wave. She doesn't like talking, but without Kim utilizing a class and volunteer students and harassing professors and harassing filmmakers, this stuff wouldn't happen. So it takes one driving force, and Kim is the force for this. Her assistant, Kara Rader, has spent a lot of time calling you guys, getting bios, and getting us in the loop. And I'd like to thank Kara for her time and energy in this process too. And, Matt Ezekiel is kind of the crew chief who's been haranguing students here. Matt, thank you very much. I wish I could name all the students that were helping, but they're all very well thanked, and I appreciate all that. And before we get to our guests, I just want to give a little bit of the format today so you kind of have an idea of what's going on. And kind of what I want to do is, see who's in the crowd first, and then after we do that, we're going to go around. Each person will give a little bio on themselves just so you get familiar, and then I'll have individual questions for each one, and then we'll have a round robin area where I'll ask questions, and whoever can answer can get it, and we'll give points and dollars and everything. It'll be a lot of fun. And then we'll open it up to you guys, and then we'll have a time period where you can come up and meet and greet the filmmakers. So that's pretty much what we're going to accomplish today. And this time probably will go very fast. I know it'll go fast for us up here. Hopefully it'll go fast for you down there. So first of all, we need to know who's out here. How many of you are CSU film students or CSU students? So that is a good makeup. And how many of you are not from CSU? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. That's good to see. And how many people are kind of like filmmakers that just kind of want to learn what's going on out here? Okay, we got a couple. Okay, so this is very, I'm glad I got my questions where they're at now. Okay, that's good. That's good. I don't have to go to plan B. So that's a good thing. So I guess with that, we kind of know our audience. We know who we're talking to and kind of what it is. And this isn't going to be a real high technology. I was starting that way, but now it's going to be more of a philosophy, kind of how they got to where they are and where they see things going, how they collaborate, and how they've learned to survive in this industry. And it is an industry. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ron Fleischer with Two Tail. And Ron's going to tell us a little bit about himself, which is kind of difficult and short. He's got a great bio. I wish I could read the whole thing to you.
I'll talk fast.
But just give a night. He's got we're very fortunate to have Ron here with us.
Thank you. I'm from Chicago. What brought me to Chicago in 1981 was to go to Columbia College to study film. And I graduated there, went right into the business, being in animation. I worked for a small studio where we did animation and motion controlled graphics for TVs and industrials. And I really feel fortunate to be the last generation who actually worked in film before video came around, before digital technology, before digital media. In the 90s, I worked for a studio called Star Tunes. We subcontracted from Warner Brothers Animation. I worked from everything from Tiny Toons through Hysteria, Pinky and the Brain, Animaniacs, all the great Warner Brothers shows. And in 2001, Star Tunes closed. I worked out on the West Coast for a while. I was on a technical director on the Powerpuff Girls movie. And for the past 11 years, it's like coming full circle. Now I teach at Columbia College. I'm one of the co-directors of the animation program there in our film and video department. Been there for 11 years. And one of the things I love about working there is we all have to remain working professionals. So now I write, direct, and produce my own animated shorts, something I always wanted to do, but never had the time or energy to do after working in deadline hell for 20-something years. So it's really fantastic to actually, when you have films and they're showing on television, you know that they're appreciated, you know they're popular, but you never get to experiencing them with an audience. And that's one of the things I love about making my short films and going to different film festivals like Cleveland International and experiencing my short with an audience. So it's been wonderful coming here. This is my second time here.
That's great. Thank you. And that is, so you have a nice little, you see your graphic up there? by the way?
Oh, wow, cool. I didn't see that.
Now we have Silas here. Silas, you got your little.
Hi, I'm
pictures
Silas
there.
Height. I'm a film, TV, video game, commercial composer, and I also write and produce songs with artists, and got a studio in LA. I've been doing it for about 10 years. The first 7 years I worked at a studio in Hollywood called Mutato Musica, which is Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo, his studio. He's family. I got my foot in the door there as an intern to start out, fresh out of college, making coffee and, working my way up. Pretty soon I was scoring commercials, then got to do TV, film, games, all that, and took off. So I did that pretty much nonstop for about 7 years, and then 3 years ago I went freelance, and I do the same thing now, but for myself rather than a company. And it's great.
Why don't you
About sums it up.
He had a good little, tell him about the film that you worked on for this and how quick that went.
Sure,
I think
The
it's
Record
very
Breaker. It's a great little film. It's about 30 minutes. It's a doc, and it's about the guy that has the most records in the Guinness Book of World Records, like really crazy stuff like pogoing up Mount Fuji and like carrying a 3-toed sloth while blowing a postage stamp and just really wacky stuff. It's a good little film. But the director came up to me, and this is about after 2 years after he first approached me. He says, "Oh my gosh, we have to get this done. We've got 2 weeks. The New Yorker Online just ran our trailer, and festivals want it now. Can you score it real quick?" So I was like, "Sure." So he gave me the movie. I didn't really have a lot of time for back and forth with him, which is normally part of the process where they have more input, but I kind of knew what he was going for, and he trusted me, so I just scored the whole thing front to back and gave it back to him. He was, pretty shocked and surprised, and but it worked out. He liked the vision, and I think overall it actually helped because I was able to get a really creative, cohesive vision across right away, and we didn't really have time to strip it down or do much with
Probably was a
it.
good thing.
And it turned out to be good.
But that quick turnaround just kind of blew me away for getting something out there and that fast. That's what a professional can do, very fast. And that's what's a little different from you guys. So that's congratulations. All right, our next little bubble and graphic and everything. That is you, Kate. Okay.
Oh,
Yes, and they got a
I
nice
just
picture
wanted
of
to
you in there.
have a peek. I'm Katie Damian. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. I'm originally from Florida, and I went to film school at the University of Central Florida, which was a really great opportunity for me to learn. I started making movies when I was 12, so I had kind of always been doing that, but didn't really know what I was doing until I kind of went into film school and got some guidance. And I was really lucky to go to that film school. We were partnered with MGM Studios and with SeaWorld because it's in Orlando where all the parks are. So I got to shoot one of my student films on an MGM backlot on like a real sound stage. So that was like, I have not done that since because it's like very expensive. But I did freelance work after that in just whatever kind of job I could get in the film industry. I worked as an editor, I worked in the camera department, I was a PA fetching coffee for people, like no job is too small in the film industry, just especially when you're freelancing, you just gotta keep finding the next job. And then I worked on cruise ships for 5 years as a broadcast technician because I just wanted to travel the world. I was gonna do it for 1 year, and then 5 years later, I was like, okay, for real, I'm gonna quit and get a real job now. And when I finished there, I ended up in Asheville, North Carolina, because my parents were there, and I was visiting them, and I just loved it so much that I wanted to stay. And now I work at a news station in the promotions department, just a local ABC affiliate, and that kind of pays the bills, and I make movies and do commercial work on the side.
Yeah. All right, we have this is the first in the history of our, 6 years we've been doing this? And we actually have one of our students, and two of our students on
last
the
year. We
panel.
did it last year.
Nah, it didn't count. This is the first year it's important.
All right, nice.
So,
That's true.
well, so you're gonna get a perspective of kind of what it's like to work through the system, and then you have some that have kind of jumped into the system. And there's no two paths are the same as you're gonna find. So why don't you tell us your path?
Hi, my name is Joseph Jarecki. I'm a graduate of Cleveland State's Film Department. Graduated in '09. I am a commercial producer and editor with Travis Pollard Film and Video with Travis, which is a company he started back in 2008. My story just is I'm sort of at the very beginning of my career, but I came to film school just desperately wanting to make movies like everybody else does. You know, everybody gets in, I want to make movies, this is going to be great. And I got hip deep in the department and really, really involved. And once I graduated, you started seeing kind of everybody kind of go in their own different directions. And I had I don't know if I would call it luck or what, but I started in the master's of the communications master's program here. And while I was doing that, Travis and I
sucked him in.
started working together because he had started a small video production company a couple of years before, and we'd been hovering around each other for a couple of years. And now I've spent the last 2 years working full time as a commercial story producer and editor, and we focus mainly on trying to tell really, really good stories and trying to do all of that on budget and in a way that's healthy and allows us to create a business and all that, because that's a part after film school, kind of going out there and going like, okay, now I want to do this for a living and really do it, and just trying, and we've spent the last couple of years just trying to get ourselves in front of anyone who's willing to give us money to tell a story. And so it's been a really neat, I actually had John Bond for advanced editing, and editing is pretty much that's my main kind of bread and butter and where I do most of my work. And so it's been interesting and cool, and we got a short film in last year in the festival, and we just got our film Fusion, the Art of Collaboration, in this year. So it's been cool. It's been cool, but not a whole heck of a lot to tell.
Great.
Yeah.
Yep, you're on.
Oh,
Nice pictures there.
So I'm Travis Pollard. I'm also a graduate, if you're from Cleveland State Film Program. I graduated in 2010. And my story's a little more wiggly. In high school I studied engineering, but somehow along the line of building up this really cool engineering school transcript, I realized I didn't want to do it. I wanted to make films. And my transcript said nothing about art, and so nobody would give me money to go to school to study film, so I had to pay my way. And as I started doing that, I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to on-ramp. I started a company with a friend of mine, just a video production company, and it was awful. I mean, we didn't make good stuff. We didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea we didn't know what we were doing, but we kept going. And so years go by. I plugged into CSU and was taking some classes part time, and then I met some artists that were working at a different level, and they were I met a guy named Ryan Lott, who actually he's a composer. He lives out in LA now. Does a lot of commercial stuff as well, and he was when I met him, I saw an artist who was making a living at his craft, surrounded himself by amazingly talented people who were all making a living at the craft, creating work that was at a level that I'd never seen before, and who genuinely cared for each other. They were functional human beings. It was amazing, and I was 19 years old, and I did whatever I could to get around them and him, and I started growing. I started growing as a person, but I also started growing as an artist. And they weren't filmmakers; they were musicians and dancers and choreographers and all sorts of different artists. And I just served them in any way, shape, or I did the doc shots. We were Inlet Dance Theater was one of the companies who was involved in that scene. Is a company here in town. We still do their video production stuff just because we had that history with them. But and so kind of to fast forward, I got plugged as I continued to pursue film. I eventually plugged back into CSU and was able to. After I started my business in 2008 and started making a living, and I didn't have a fully rounded craft of film. I knew how to edit. And I knew, and that editing, my ability to edit and sort of shoot with the cheap cameras that I had available to me, allowed me to go freelance and make a living at my craft. And it was really scary because I had to leave the coffee shop job, and And so, just saying, you know, that big job, that money runs out in a couple months, you know, so you got to find more. And so, and when I plugged back into CSU, I was able to continue working, growing my business, and it seemed like every week I'd learn something, and I'd go, right, next week I was selling it. I was like, look, I can shoot something that's going to look good, you know, and got through film school with an amazing education. We shot on film, as you guys know, and which was an amazing experience, not because film's better. Film is awesome and I love it, but you know, the cool thing about shooting on film is you're shooting blind, and you have to think about it, and you have to know that when you turn it on, that it's going to look good, because you don't have a viewfinder. And so fast forward, it's like we've been blessed with really amazing, talented people. I've got, you know, Joe on my side. We've got a couple other guys in the studio that are doing awesome things. We've got a core of freelancers that we work with that are awesome, and it's just, I surround myself with really talented people. We've been able to make craft that we're really, product that we're really proud of, and we found a way to make a living at it, and I don't know, somehow we get really cool clients in the process. So that's kind of the end of my story for the moment.
Okay. Well, you just took 3 of my questions here. No, very good. All right, well, I'd like to start with Ron here. And, you know, Ron, full circle student to teacher with a bunch of experience in between. Tell them what an Oxbury stand is.
We still
I
have
don't know what
three.
it is, but
We still have 3. An Oxbury stand is what they've used for 100 years to shoot animation. It's basically a table that has a round circular disc in the middle with 2 peg bars, one on top and one on the bottom, that holds all of the registrated animation bond or paper that the drawings or cells and backgrounds are traced onto. The camera is on a large pole or 2 poles and actually moves up and down. So to zoom in or truck in, the camera either moves up and down on the pole to the artwork, and the artwork can move on this compound that it's on. It can move north, south, east, and west. It can rotate, and the pegs can move independently as well. So it's crazy. I spent, oh God, I'm gonna start getting twinges. So many nights, and I can relate to what you're saying. Shooting blind, okay? You're shooting blind in one pass. You're just shooting the film once through. In animation, we went beyond cell animation in the late 80s and did a lot of, you know, high-tech effects, like slit scanning, like the opening titles for Superman, the original movie, and a bunch of other visual effects would all have to be shot on the Oxbury under multiple passes. In other words, you would, if you had 100 frames you had to shoot, you'd shoot from frames 0 to 100. And you'd only expose a certain part of the picture. Then you'd cap the lens, and you'd wind back to the beginning and expose something else. So you get all these different colors, these different effects, these glows, these gradients. You know, no Photoshop or anything back then. And we'd have to do all of these lighting tests where we would bracket each exposure going from f2.8 to f16 or whatever, a tick at a time, and take notes on what exposure we would shoot everything at. And then we would wait the next day to see what we shot, because I'd run the film to the lab real late and see it the next morning, and I'd have to make notes on all my tests. And then actually shooting our jobs on an Oxbury, you know, you're shooting these multiple passes. Sometimes these would be 8, 16, 20-hour shoots. I'd be under these hot 1Ks for hours and hours at a time, literally, you know, it's not a pretty picture, but stripped down to my underwear at night, shooting because it would get so hot, run the film over to Astro at 4 in the morning, then show up, you know, to show the film to the clients at 9 o'clock the next morning, keeping my fingers crossed that I didn't screw up any passes, that the lab didn't scratch the negative. It's just so amazing. These days I do things like this sitting at home in my underwear, on my couch, on my laptop.
Right. With a thermostat.
Yeah, with a thermostat. And you know, some of these things, you know, I remember getting into post-production a little bit, just sitting in these suites that would cost us $1,000, $1,500 an hour. And it was like watching film dry, to watch this film gets transferred 1 frame at a time, just so slow. And it was, and that's where any of the graphics had to be applied. That's where all the color correction, everything else would be done. And so that's a little bit of that unpleasant memory of the Oxbury. We use it as a history lesson for our students. Nobody actually shoots on it. Actually, a few of them are equipped with visualizers, with video cameras, so they could shoot and capture and see it immediately. but we would never put our students through it. It's mostly a relic from the Flintstone days.
Which leads into, currently Ron has over 150 students, you said, in the animation program in Columbia. That's incredible. Now, what sort of skill sets do you recommend to your students? Like, often I have students that come in and I'll say, have any of you done any Photoshop? Oh, I know Photoshop. Have you taken an art class? No.
Right, well,
what skill sets do you tell animators? What do you like to see them
sure.
come in with?
Well, it's very important to know that our animation program is in the film and video department. We're just another concentration, like editing, producing, directing, documentary, cinematography, right? So we have traditional animation and CG, computer animation. We offer a BA degree, general degree in film, where they could just take our core film core classes and then 3 animation classes, the rest are electives. And the BFA is really drilled down within the major. So we love being in film and video. There's also another department, Interactive Arts and Media, where the gaming majors are. So we want all of our students to think like filmmakers first. They're filmmakers who use the medium of animation to tell their stories and to express themselves. So that's the main philosophy. So we make all our students take our foundation classes. When they come in, they get a 1-2 shot of history of cinema, aesthetics of cinema, and here's the equipment, go out in Grand Park and go shoot a movie and edit it and put it together, not knowing what you're doing, but have a good time and learn from the experience, and then we'll tell you what you were doing, and we'll teach you along the way. So that's something that's really important. We want our students in animation, especially on the traditional side, to take classes in art and design. So we make them take figure drawing. Who doesn't want to draw naked people anyway, right?
Right.
Life drawing, which is like still life, and history of art too. We also like our traditional students to take maybe the introduction to computer animation class. And we make a lot of our CG students take the foundation classes in animation, which is Animation 101, storyboarding, history of animation. But we also make them take either stop motion or drawing for Animation 1, because foundations in animation and movement and timing are foundations. So before you actually do it on a computer, or while you're doing it concurrently on a computer, we want you to get in there and get dirty. We want you to get your hands on puppets, or we want you to draw animation and learn a little bit about it.
That's great. How do you go about, this is more for me, and it's also for students, lifelong learning. That's going to be part of you the rest of your life. You're
That's
getting,
right.
you're getting a little older now,
That's right.
but this stuff's coming at you a little quicker. How do you go about it yourself, learning this stuff before you teach a student?
There's only one way to do it, and that's diving into it. I'm too old for video games. I am. I used to love video games as a kid, and I haven't played a video game in like 15 years. Recently, my students brought in BioShock Infinite to the class. Anybody play that, right? And I get like motion sickness looking at that stuff, right? So what I do is to feed my brain and my curiosity, replacing video games, I learn software. So I give myself projects to learn Photoshop and After Effects and Final Cut and Vegas, some of the programs I use, and I give myself projects to learn on that. And even after doing stuff in the business for so many years, and this is one of the things that we have at Columbia for our capstone project in animation, is that our students, when they learn animation, it tends to be a very solitary process. Whether you're working in traditional animation or CG animation, you're either behind your light box drawing stuff until your hand falls off, or you're behind a computer going click, click, click. But they don't get a chance to collaborate like our film students, because filming is very immediate. So in their senior year, they get to work on a project together, 15 students in a class, where they pitch their ideas in the fall, day after Labor Day, and the second week in May, in a huge theater, they stand up on stage and premiere their project. And I love it now because they're winding down to the last 4 weeks of this 30-week class. And this is the most fun for me, because this is where they're taking all their drawings, they're scanning them onto a computer, they're setting up their scenes for ink and paint and compositing. This is where they learn all the mistakes they really made. Even I can't catch all the mistakes they're making during the project. Like, hey, there's continuity problems, there's stuff missing from the scene, where are all the teacups and place settings at the table here? So I love it because this is where they become problem solvers. And that's what always happens, no matter how old you are, hopefully, and no matter what you're doing, no matter what aspect it is, there will always be new things to learn, and there will always be hoops to jump through and things to figure out. That's one of my favorite things to do. And on my film, A Tooth Tale, which I basically did about 80% on my own, I hired some of my students to do some of the animation. But writing, directing, producing, all the ink paint, scanning, compositing, and everything else, and the editing is all on me. And I have to figure things out, you know? So you need to be open. You need to realize that life, no matter what you're doing in life, it's always going to be some kind of learning experience. To really grab onto these challenges and think of them as opportunities rather than to be afraid of them. And don't ever be afraid to learn something or learn something about yourself. One of the hardest things for me to do is to be, is in editing, you know, in animation. Editing is really tough because we can't shoot things from different perspectives and then figure out what to do later, right? So we have to storyboard everything first. We have to create our story reel so we know exactly what each shot is and how long each shot is. And after the animation is done, after all that time, and all the money that's spent in it, you know, it's really hard to cut those shots out to make things shorter. And so listen to your colleagues, listen to your peers, listen to people that you trust. You know, I ended up cutting about 1.5 minutes out of my 7.5-minute film. And, you know, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't move the story forward, if it doesn't, you know, push character development forward, even if it works, cut the shot, cut a sequence of shots. If your film still works without them, then leave them out.
Yeah. Yep. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to work our way around the horn here. Now, Silas, you have a relationship with Mark Mothersbaugh. We see him on the Kent State commercials. The Devo fella went to Kent State. And you kind of worked your way up through internship. You were able to stay within the same company for about 7 years. What was the interpersonal relationship between you and Mark, and how did that help you advance through the system, and then also learn to stand by your own without him?
We had a good relationship. I mean, he's my uncle, but I didn't know him too well before going to work for him. I had visited him a few times, but you know, I really.
So your parents set this internship?
No.
No? How did they get set up?
You know, I went to college for composition, and I studied art, music, and business in college. Put it together
Good
into my
combo.
own degree because I knew
Great.
at some point I'd want to be my own boss and have my own studio and stuff like that. And I just wanted all those aspects together. And I put together a great little resume that was just perfect for him. It was a piece of art into itself. And I showed up. I was like, hey, I'm going to be in town. Can I stay with you for a night or two? He's like, yeah, sure, you know. So I did, and then I sprung that on him. Hey, I'm going to be moving here. I'm looking for a job. You know, can I please make coffee or something for a little bit? You know, and he was like, he was hesitant, you know, because they don't really do interns there. And I was like, we don't really need anybody, and you know, your family, that's always kind of awkward. But I begged him, and he's a nice guy, and he was like, okay, I'll give you a trial run. And by the end of that, you know, I had started taking a shot at commercials, which are, you know, it's like a nice place to get your feet wet, doing some demos. And anyway, I took off from there, and I was, you know, really spent a ton of time there and wrote a lot of music. So I started getting into TV, film, and games. And so, you know, he's got a few other staff composers there, and I became one of them, and I got a studio there, and we would work together on stuff with Mark, scoring projects, and there was so much work coming through that we would split a lot of it up, you know. And as far as working with him, he was great because, I mean, he's super gifted and, you know, insanely creative and has so much experience under his belt. I don't know if you've ever looked at his like list of credits, but it's
unbelievable.
I mean, it's
Look at it today.
ridiculous. And one of the things was that Powerpuff movie. I think they did some stuff for that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. But anyway, so we had a great relationship.
Yeah.
And then I think, you know, I learned a lot from watching him and, you know, getting feedback from him and stuff. And also from the other composers that worked there. You were saying something about being able to, you know, listen to your peers and stuff and take advice and be able to cut stuff if you need to or whatever. I think that's really important. And I would have other composers come in and I'd be like, you know, I've been staring at this for 2 hours. What am I, you know, what does it need? What does it not need? And they'd be like, cut that. That's dumb. That's stolen from an 80s song. Get rid of it. You know, and I'd be like, oh, great. Okay. And being able to take that sort of criticism, not negative criticism, but just critique, you know, is insanely valuable. And anyway, so learned that there. And then after about 7 years, it was kind of the same thing every day, like movies, film, TV, commercials, and that was wonderful. But I felt trained, and at that point, I knew I'd wanted to go off on my own, so I had for a few years before that, started buying the microphones that I liked, buying the equipment that I needed, building up, you know. And when it came time to leave, you know, I told Mark, and he was like, I was like, I think I just hit a ceiling here, you know, there's not a whole lot else I can really do. And he's like, yeah, you're right, you know, good luck, I hate to see you leave. But so it was a,
Oh, that's
it was
great.
a nice farewell.
That's great. And you addressed on one of my questions on how you use other people's feedback, and we'll talk about that later, but, you know, being a music producer, creator, how is a nice guy like you make it in a mean guy's business?
A lot of hustle.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, think about it, it's a tough business.
It is.
Tougher, I think, out of any one of our areas that we'll talk about. The music is just brutal.
It's really hard.
How do you survive it?
It's getting harder all the time because budgets are shrinking and shrinking. And everybody, you know, has access to be able to make music, and so it takes less and less experience, and, you know, your studio doesn't have to be insanely expensive to make good sounding music. So it's tough. Surely working at Mutato helped a lot because my resume is, when I left there, was fairly large. However, because he was my uncle, I didn't want to steal any of his contacts, so that made it really hard.
Right.
So I left, and I was like,
Yeah.
all these people I'd worked with, I didn't really want to reach out to, so I had to make a lot of new contacts on my own. So I spend a lot of time still doing that.
Sure.
Last week I was in San Francisco. They have it's called Game Developers Conference, which is a huge conference for people that make video games, which doesn't really apply to me, but the people that hire me go there. So I go there and meet up with them and make friends and try and get work that way and do a lot of that kind of hustling. And of course I have an agent as well. Get some work from her, but mostly it's really just my own kind of
It's word
hustling
of
and
mouth type
networking.
business.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of networking.
That must have been difficult, you know, being able to, because clients get tied to their composers.
Yep.
It's a very personal
Yeah.
product you're delivering, and they don't want to share that with other people right off the bat. You know, for you not to go back and take the clients, which that'd be hard to do against family, but
Yeah.
that had to be tempting when you were starting. So I mean,
It would
I
have
give
been
you a lot
much
of credit.
easier.
Absolutely, short term, short term.
Probably. I
But
just
would it
couldn't,
hurt you
I just
long
couldn't do
term?
it, you know,
Right.
we're close, so, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Kate, now's your turn here. I loved your background on the bio. It reminds me of me and my family. The first thing was the parents made us do plays. All the kids get together, okay, write something and perform for everybody. You know, so while the parents are drinking, the kids do a stupid play. So you leave their cocktail out, and then you ran and grabbed like a VHS camcorder and you just like shot the hell out of it. And you're just like, I'm going to do something like this. One of the first things I ask my students, have you ever, before you even came to any education, did you ever try telling a story using any kind of medium? And when they raise their hand, yeah, well, I picked up a Super 8 camera, and I go, you're going to get an A in this class. So that background has got you where you are today. Okay, then let's move on with that then. So, do you still feel like a child? And how does that help you to persevere in the field?
I do, you know, just in general in life, sometimes I'll be like making my mortgage payment or going to my job, and I'm like an adult now. I feel like I'm a kid just pretending to be an adult. Like I just have this job that I have to go to and I have these bills that I have to pay, but really I'm still a kid. And I think that it can be a very good attitude to have, to always be learning, to always, you know, to never think, oh, I know everything now. I've made it now, you know, just there's always something more to learn, and there's always so much to learn from fellow filmmakers, from people that you're collaborating with, things that you just would never think about or you thought you already knew. I think if you keep an open mind like that, then it helps your work be stronger.
Okay. You explained that you went from linear editing, which is probably, nobody really understands what that means, but there's actually tape machines that you could do very basic editing with, and did you learn CMX editing, or were you kind of...
I did tape to tape.
Tape to tape.
Yeah, and I had to do various, like I used beta tapes and,
Sure.
and some of that was because I was starting so young, like when I was in high school, we used VHS. And then when I was working on ships, the equipment was very old, so that was beta. And then when I was in film school, we actually were the last class to cut film. Like we cut 16 millimeter film, and I think that was my first nonlinear editing. But it was such a valuable experience. And if
Physical.
Yes,
Yeah.
if you ever have an
miss that
opportunity to cut film,
Yeah.
do
Oh, yeah.
it, because when you are cutting, you know, you're looking at all your footage and you have these slices of long film and it's in this big basket and it's all hanging on these little bins. And then you're putting things together and you're watching your clips and you think, oh, I'm going to take 3 frames out of that and tighten it up. And you pull your film over and you cut it off, and then you save those little 3 frames and you take your tape and you put it down and then the other side. And then you put it back in and you watch it and you go, oh, no, that's not right. Then you gotta pull it back, rip the tape apart, and put the free frames back and tape the boat. You know, it's like it takes so long to do every cut. It forces you to really think about what you're cutting before you cut it. And now on computers, it's so easy to just be undo. I didn't like that. Oh, I'm gonna try this. You know. So if you get a chance to work with film, it'll just help you to think about cutting, which will then help you if you're shooting. Will help you when you're shooting your film. If you think like an editor, you know, your shooting will be even better too.
Great.
That kicked in my muscle memories of doing that. I must have done that like, I used to cut on an 8-plate cam, all the Warner Brothers stuff, 35 millimeter.
I was going to ask you.
And it's like, yeah, I love what you said. Oh my, you know, just the physical nature of holding the stuff and cutting it. It's just, I could literally do that stuff in my sleep, like muscle memory. When you do something a million times, I don't care if I haven't done it since the 90s. Right? It's like as soon as you started saying that, my fingers started twitching. You get so fast at it. Yeah, it's great. You know, I really appreciate being able to do it on my laptop, on my lap.
Yes.
But coming from that background, you appreciate it even
Right.
more. Yeah.
How do you explain to students that they have this immediacy and almost the simplicity of a lot of this editing to really go back and think a little bit before they actually cut? It seems like they're doing trial and error before they even think.
Yeah.
How do you tell them to go back one step when they haven't had the opportunity to do things physical and really plan it out?
Yeah, I think that it depends on your role. Like if you are going to be shooting and editing and doing everything, you know, for your own project, you can start in pre-production and when you've got your script, really be thinking about how your shots are going to work, how they're going to come together. You know, I start planning then when I'm scripting. I'm starting to see how it plays together in my head. And sometimes when I'm out shooting too, and this, if you're just working as an editor, it is great to have an editor on set with you because they will help you. You know, you're thinking of a million different things, and they might go like, you didn't get a cutaway of what's on the table here, and we need to see what's on the table. Where you're just like focused on the people and you forget, and you're like, oh, okay. So if you get a chance to have your editor on set with you, definitely do that. But just thinking like it's hard, especially if you're in a big hurry. But sometimes I will be, you know, I've already got everything storyboarded, but I'll stop and just like close my eyes for a second and think about how the entire scene plays out. You know, so if you're in the editing room or whatever, before you start trying to put things together, just stop and put it together in your head first. Think, am I going to start with the master? Am I going to start in close and then come out to the master? You know, play it all through in your head for a minute and then start working with it.
Great, thank you. All right, now for Joe and Travis, I'm going to lump you two together.
Cool.
Okay,
That's fine.
And this is a real easy question for you. So who was your favorite teacher / mentor in life?
Wait a second.
I'm holding a button right here. No.
I think I got money
No,
called.
but think about it. Probably, doesn't hold on a minute. I got my credit card thing. You can swipe that into my iPad. No, I mean, this can go back to grade school, high school. I'm not talking about Cleveland State. Someone must have done something to make you guys stay in this business.
I have 2 that are really important. One is probably Dr. Lieberman. He was just at the right time in my life able to teach me the craft of storytelling visually, which, you know, Cleveland State has a very small but very dedicated program, and through that program and through what he was doing, I was really able to learn the craft of filmmaking. It's like, we don't have everything. That's just, we don't have everything, and that's besides the point. If you got do you have a camera? Can you tell a story? Can you put the camera in the right place for the right emotion? And getting to learn that, particularly at the time of my life that I learned it, that was kind of invaluable and changed my life, because it was like before that, it was just like, as you know, running around with a camera in my backyard for years, you know, and just making stuff, but not having any idea what you're making, and just like looking at movies and going, oh, I can try that, and so to really kind of come into it and learn that craft and that idea of where you putting your camera. How's that all going to go together? How are you telling the story? How is every decision you're making go back into story? And so that was invaluable. And then the other one would actually be Travis, because he, again, like right at that right time in my life, when I've now finished film school and am floundering with all the rest of my friends, because you know, we're in Cleveland and there's stuff going on, but some of it feels still far away, and the small stuff seems really small sometimes. And so to like he kind of came in, and we had this weird relationship early on, which was like I was a couple of years ahead of him in the program, but he'd been doing the business for a couple of years. And so we had this, and we kind of danced around each other for a while. And so to like then have someone who was able to take that and go, all right, that's all, you know, all that stuff you just learned, that's great. How can we apply it to this ad, you know, to this 2 minutes mini doc, you know, or something like that? How can you take all of that craft and put it into this thing that has a couple $100s or whatever in it, but, you know, you're getting paid, you're getting fed, and all of that. And that even more instrumentally than being able to learn the process changed my life. Because that was like,
Yeah, great. Travis?
As far as mentors go, I've been really fortunate. I mean, from the, like, when I was 14 years old, I met a friend of my grandmother's who was a guy named Bill Schumann. He introduced, I shook his hand. I said, you know, my name's Travis. We had a 3-minute conversation, and he said, do you want a job? And I spent the next 6 years, I started as an intern with him. He was a retired teacher who had built and sold a PPO of 30,000 doctors, something in the healthcare industry, and then had started this consulting company in telecommunications, basically helping people with their phone bills. And it was a really amazing guy, really passionate guy, and I spent from 14 to 20 just studying, just being his right-hand guy. And by the time I left, it was you know, I was his vice president as much as you can be at 19, 20 years old. You know, and it was, and I learned a lot, but it was like that, but it's just like from there to I mentioned Ryan Lott and Bill Wade earlier on, you know, just artists that had meant a lot to me, and you know, and then here at CSU, there's actually 2 professors. I mean, you know, Evan, Dr. Lieberman, I learned, similar to Joe, I learned different things from Evan, but basically, what I took from Evan was the craft. What I took from Dr. Lieberman was the craft. Was just, this is what the Hollywood system was. This is what I learned. This is what you need. This is how it works. And the cool thing for me is, like, we got to learn what that means, and what is, you know, what does every job do, and how does the whole system work together to do a thing. And then kind of moving on to that, like from, you know, into my commercial work, it was like, okay, we don't have the budgets they have. Like, you know, we're in 2013 Cleveland. Like, that doesn't exist here and now for me. So how do we? But the rules are the same. And so for us, it was taking that Hollywood system and then kind of breaking it down and saying, why does that person have a job? Why does that person? Oh, I get it. I'm a producer now, and then you're the editor, and then I'm the animator now, which means I submit to the editor. Ooh. But now I'm the producer again, and I get to tell you what to do. You know, and that was, and then the other professor that meant a lot to me was I had an art history professor here called Dr. Baskin, and she was a force, man. She was a small and mighty woman who did her craft very well, and I like, and you know, if somebody would walk into class late, she would finish her sentence, and she would stop and she would look. Because you weren't going to interrupt her. She would stop and look at that person. She said, if you were going to be late, don't come. And she was serious. And that person never came again. But she was, I mean, and the thing was she demanded excellence, and she got it. And those who couldn't give it left. And it was, I mean, I just had so many amazing people to pull from. And I don't know, I don't have their knowledge, but I got to see them work. And so those are my answers.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great. And between the two of you, what editing software do you use now, and how did you go about learning it in a short period of time?
Can I take that one? Awesome. So we are currently on the Adobe platform that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. We're editing on Premiere. That was an economic decision. We were very proud to be a Final Cut house. If we were a small studio, but we were very proud to be Final Cut. I liked Final Cut because I liked the people that were that taught themselves Final Cut made an effort to get a Mac. This was years ago now. Made an effort to get a Mac and buy the software and everything. Those guys are the ones I wanted in my studio. So that's why we were a Final Cut house, because I didn't want the Adobe guys. I wanted the Final Cut guys. And then as Final Cut changed and the economics of reality kind of hit, it was really like those lines dissolved and Final Cut changed directions, and it wasn't. We were spending money in a way. I was spending more money on hard drives than I was the software at that point, and it was like, the money we saved in hard drives was overwhelmingly less expensive than paying more for software. So that was sort of.
But you went, in your short period of time, you probably went through, what, 4 editing platforms?
Yeah, I know for me, because when I started it was 2000, like Adobe Premiere in 2000, and then it was Avid, and then I lost everything. And then I went to Vegas, and I loved Vegas because it was
Yeah, there you go.
because it was intuitive, and that was
Yeah,
the thing.
isn't it great?
Because I still didn't know what I was doing, and so Vegas was amazing because you
It
could
is.
just put your fingers in it and move it around, and it made sense. And then kind of transitioned from there into Final Cut in a move, and then started building a business kind of off of Vegas, and then into Final Cut, and then we transitioned finally into Premiere. But yeah.
So in his 7 years, he went through 7 levels of software while you were on an Oxbury.
I've never heard anybody mention Vegas when it comes to editing before, so kudos. That's awesome. That's the platform I use from start to finish. And first of all, you guys want some great editing software that's really powerful and totally diverse. You can work in any format for under $100. Yeah. Right? That you could render stuff from anywhere from web to HD to film resolution. Working in 24 frames per second, 23, 976, 30, PAL, NTSC. It's just amazing, really intuitive, fun to do.
And actually, jumping kind of off of what he said, in terms of editing software, the big, because that is like when you're an editor, people, oh, what software do you work on? Like it's going to be some sort of magic key to figure, like, oh, you use that software, I got it. The whole thing with the software thing and what editing program is what are you doing? What are your needs? What does your final product got to look like? Because Vegas is great until you hit the edge of what Vegas can do. Final Cut is great until you hit. So they all have different capabilities, and it's all like, Avid is an amazing system, but you got to have like $2 million to really put into it. Whereas with Adobe, you put in several $1,000s, and you got the other, it's. I would say that that whole question is just figuring out what each thing is and what each one can do, because they're all just tools. They're all just tools, and so it's like learn what that tool can do, and then understand what your needs are, and that's actually understand what your needs are first, and then go looking for the tool to do it.
Well, and actually, especially if you're early on in the process, I would just say, what do you have access to? I was working on, one of the reasons I was working on Vegas, and I was young at that point, but one of the reasons I was working on Vegas is somebody gave me a stolen copy of it. And it was like, and when I loaded it up, it worked. And it was like, I just came off of Avid, and it was like, it didn't work, because I didn't know what I was doing. It's my fault, Avid crashed, and I lost a year's worth of work, but and so some of that is just like, digging in, and because one of the things we haven't worked on Vegas in years, so it was an old version that I worked on, but one of the things was like, I know the first year I had this big project that had maybe 65 deliverables in all of its code, in all of the codecs and forms and stuff, and rendering each one, like the version of it, I couldn't do batch exporting on whatever old version of Vegas I had, and it was like the year I switched to Final Cut, I was like, wow, you mean I can just do it all and then drag and click and go away for 2 days and it comes back and it's done? That was a really big eye opener for me.
Yeah, one thing I like to tell students is nobody's baby is ugly. Everyone is like, oh, I'm a Final Cut editor, everything else sucks. It's like, no, because that's your baby right now. Get over your baby, because you're going to have to learn other stuff to get by and get through it. And I always tell you, at least learn one, then you can learn the other ones. But learn one, don't be enamored on learning the software. Get the project done. learn something, and then it will be relevant towards other ones. Now we're going into open round robin time. Okay, and anyone can jump in here for $10. With technology is doubling within a year, when you think about it. Exponentially, it's been going quicker and quicker, especially you experience that in audio. I mean, just the way the sound, now video's starting to feel that, but you've been wrestling with that. What impact does this have on getting a project completed when trying to stay current in your craft? So when do you jump into a new technology and you're trying to stay current, when do you make that move to do that? And that's really for any of you, because everyone's had to wrestle with that. It's like, this, you got this great thing, but you got to get it done. Well, how do you succeed in that? Or what, any nuggets you can tell people?
I think it's like, it depends on the job that you have coming. And also, I have my own gear, but I am to a point where I am starting to rent gear that I need instead of making the investment of purchasing, because I have something that works for me, but if I have a bigger project, I will just go out and rent whatever that is, or hire whoever that is that can do what I need to do. Like, I just, for the first time, hired a digital effects guy, because I had this, I was doing a public service announcement for a nonprofit, and I wanted to have people walking through shattering glass. That was part of the thing, and I could shoot everything with the glass, and making glass magically shatter in slow motion was impossible for me to do practically. I like to do everything practically I can, but this was just impossible. So I shot everything on a green screen, and I don't know animating, I don't do digital effects, but I was able to hire someone that did, and it looked amazing, and it was something that I never could have done. So I think with technology, it's more about storytelling. You know, work on your abilities as a storyteller, and you'll be able to find people or other, places where you can get the technology.
So what you say, don't feel you have to master this in order to bring it into a project.
Right.
Become more of a collaborator.
Yes.
And surround yourself with people.
Exactly.
As these new things come up, find people that are good at doing those, not feeling that you have to do everything yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you'll never be able to do everything
No,
yourself.
well, some people try.
Yes, yeah.
That sounds more like me. Well, as an animator, we create our world. And, for my post-production, I use Vegas, but I also use Toon Boom for scanning in all my animation, and sometimes compositing, After Effects, and Photoshop. But for me, Vegas, and because we're animators, we take our storyboards, we put them into the timeline in Vegas to time everything out. Back in the old days, in the Warner Brothers days, we used to have to time out storyboards in our heads. This was like, my boss taught me, and Bill Hanna taught him, but from Hanna-Barbera, Tom and Jerry shorts were all timed out by using a metronome, thinking about the beats.
Classical music.
Right, 2 beats per second, every 12 frames, that's when an action happens in animation. And so that's how I time out my storyboards and all my actions. And it's great because we used to have to do it all hypothetically in our heads and write it down on the storyboards, transpose those onto exposure sheets. And now with Vegas, everything's really immediate. Okay, here's what, you don't have to visualize it. Here's how it actually plays out in time. So I use Vegas to get together my whole story reel, all my storyboard panels. Then I import all of the dialogue from the recording studio. I edit my WAV files, take my select takes, throw them into one audio timeline. I have a couple of audio timelines for sound effects, and one for a temporary scratch track of music that I'm going to give to my composer, saying, hey, I'm a real big fan of Danny Elfman. I want this to sound like an Elfman soundtrack. I put in insert some clips from Pee-wee's Big Adventure or whatever, just to show them what I'm looking for. And then I use Vegas to scrub the dialogue. In other words, I could find out exactly what frames each vowel in each consonant happen on. This is something I used to have to do on a mag track reader in the squawk box. Now I do it in Vegas, so I can figure out all my track reading. When that is done, I have another timeline that I use for all the pencil tests from the scenes I put on top of that. When I get into digital ink and paint, I import all of those final files into another timeline for all of the final color work in Vegas. So it's like one-stop shopping for me. And I can't get too caught up in technology because my 6.5-minute film took me 3.5 years to make. So, by the time, I started on one platform, on Vegas 8, now I'm on Vegas 11 or whatever comes around. So it's really a matter of knowing what you're using, what you're comfortable with using. There's always new tricks to learn. in After Effects or Photoshop or even in Vegas. But for me, it's really the place where it all comes together in the end. What's nice too is that if I update any of my shots, if I redo a shot because there was a mistake in it or whatever, wherever those final frames end up, they're always linked to the Vegas project. So I never have to re-import them into Vegas. The files automatically update themselves.
I wanted to add on to what Katie was saying, which is, you really, when you're looking at technology, because that is the big kind of debate as you make an art, is like keeping up with the technology. And you really actually have to, kind of even like you're saying, is like, when you're in the middle of a project, you can't be worried about that, oh, there's this next step coming out. You gotta be aware of it. But it's all about making the best use of storytelling, as she said. Travis, when he was building the business out first, had a moment where he's like, do I invest in technology or do I invest in people? And we have found every time, that the investment in people and the kind of craft of storytelling has always moved us forward as opposed to technology, which is like, I have a thing about that actually. I have a philosophy that in terms of that there's a threshold that you have to get to where it has to be good enough, and I don't mean that where it's like, oh, well, I'm just gonna settle for that. It's just like, given what your project is, it's like, does this need to be Rembrandt right now, or does this need to just do its job and get the best thing you can do to get the story across? Because it's all everything you do is really gonna be based on story anyway. So it's just like, we go through this, like, do we shoot on red? Well, we don't really have the post capability to handle red. It's a huge hard drive commitment, and software and RAM and the whole thing and hardware. And so it's like, okay, we're not going to shoot on red right now. We shoot on DSLR because right now that bumps us way over the threshold. It's like people, the DSLR, not the best camera on the market, but it's really good. And it gives us a really nice quality. And we know we want to make that jump, but that jump has way more to do with economy than it does with anything else. And kind of then like, it's like, okay, what's your budget and what are you trying to do? Because if you're, if you've got $3,000, you're not shooting on red. You're shooting on DSLR, and and you're just using it as a tool to tell a story.
And to piggyback on that, just kind of being the guy who's always watching the technology and actually making those investments in the studio, it's like what I've found is like, it's really important for me to be aware of what's coming out. And like, oh, okay, new whatever's out, and it has the new, new Adobe comes out now. It's got this feature and this feature and this feature, and those are really cool in it. It's got all these upgrades, and that's great. And so now I'm aware of what that next step, I'm going to buy in that next step. And yeah, it's going to be a little better, and we should involve ourselves and invest. But I know, and so for us now, we've got that. Now I have that knowledge of what the new technology can do. And so for us, it's like we find ourselves in a project that's really going to help us, instead of just buying it when it comes out and just spending money when it's there to stay, so that we've got the badge of we've got the state-of-the-art stuff, because we can't afford to be that proud. We just don't have that much financing. So for us, it's like, oh, wait a second, because it's like learning technology, because it's like, you could sit down with lynda.com and you could spend every day, and you'll never stop because it keeps changing. So it's like, if you really want to know it all, you're never gonna really digest that in knowledge unless you're. But so if you're aware of a tool, something in the program that you don't know of, and you're like, okay, that's neat, I'll learn that when I need to, and then you're doing a project, and you're like, oh, this thing that I could learn will be really cool. Now that's time to do it, because you're solving a problem. And so it's based on, but if you're not aware, it's like, even as simple as the multicam tool and most editors have, it's like, if you're not aware that that tool exists, and you're just lining them up on the timeline and cutting, you'll be happy all day until you realize but if you're aware of the tool, you don't have to know it, you have to be aware. If you're aware of the tool, then you're like, oh, I need to do this multiple camera thing, and you plug it in, you figure out how it works, and now you're just clicking buttons. And it's very different, because you're aware of it, and you can learn it the time you needed to, because you're solving a problem that had immediate need, and the knowledge that you gain from that experience is going to stay with you, because you're solving a problem, and you're not just learning it to learn it. It's a very different thing.
Okay, I think we have time maybe for one more round robin, and then we'll open it up. And if you guys don't open it up, we'll just go right back into our format. What do you think about that? We've talked about technology and understanding it, embracing it, getting into the projects, time frames. You have to admit now, things get done so much faster and quicker than you have time to be retrospective on it, just because of the immediacy of the way things are and what people demand out there. You had to turn that around in a couple weeks. It's crazy, but I mean, that happens. You're professional, that's what it takes.
Yep.
What tools do you use? Tools being communication, internet, whatever. How do you become retrospective within a project when you're being forced in a time frame to deliver something?
How do you become retrospective?
Yeah, how do you look at it without, you know, like you're doing it and you like it, you give it. How do you, when do you give yourself personal time to look at something before you start communicating and sharing that with others? When do you know it's right?
Well, I typically will try and put in a little bit of time so that I can write a piece, step to maybe get it about 80 to 90% done,
Okay.
and then step away if I can, if the schedule allows, step away for the afternoon, come back to it in the morning, the next morning when I'm fresh, and that's when I'll tweak the mix and make any last minute adjustments and, you know, revisit it. I mean, a lot of stuff I do, it's like, you know, less than 24-hour turnaround, so there's not really a lot of time for reflection, and I just, fortunately I have the training to just kind of knock it out and get it there, but I do like to have that time to reflect, and especially if I'm working on like something longer, like songs that could be, you know, maybe I'll have jammed 50 instruments in there or something, and it's kind of a complicated mix. I like to try and give myself the time and plan ahead so that I know that I can take breaks from it and come back to it with fresh ears.
And you're in a longer format, a longer time period.
Speed and animation.
So, I mean,
You know what?
the process
no,
you use though,
yeah.
because now you've been working on something for so long, you are so close to it. Maybe you're too close to it. How do you get away from it?
Well,
You're almost the opposite.
For me, my personal projects, there's no deadline. It's usually, you know, enforced by myself. Like there's a festival, first round of festivals coming up. I want to hit Chicago International. You know, the last date for submissions in July. Last year, I really pushed myself to finish the film to get it done in time. But in regards to animation production, I learned a lot from one of my mentors and my boss at Star Toons, John McClenahan, where we were doing, you know, I went from the business of working on 30-second TV commercials to 30-minute animated shows for television, right? And also some direct-to-video releases. And we had this one project in that we were bidding on. It's like, okay, if you're going to take this job, you have to get it done in X amount of time. And John could tell that, you know, everyone at the studio was a little bit worried about this, you know, a little bit panicky. Especially when you're living on a job-to-job basis, you don't want to turn away work, right? So he sat us all down in the conference room, and basically what he did was brilliant. He reverse engineered the job and broke it all down to teams and individuals, week by week, as long as you hit your quota, as long as you get the posing done by this time, as long as the animation's done by this time, as long as we're up to digital ink and paint by here. No, it's basically breaking things down by math. Animation isn't as difficult to manage in regards to budget or production because we still tend to do it by the foot. That's how we pay animators, that's how we pay timing directors, people who work on exposure sheets, cleanup. There's 16 frames per foot in animation, and that's how a lot of it is bought and sold. So we break down things mathematically, rather than thinking of things in a block of 1,440 frames per minute. At 24 frames per second, you know, it's only 90 feet. So you're working with a number of 90 rather than 1,440. So that's what I end up doing with my class, because the day the class starts, the day after Labor Day, they know that at the end of the second week in May, they have to be up on stage and premiere their films. So they're either going to be showing something that they're really proud of that they worked on all year, or they're going to explain to everybody that showed up why it didn't get done on time. So while we work on story and storyboards and all pre-production aspects the first semester, and I see what people could do in regards to their animation skills, during the break in between fall and spring semesters, I sit down and I work out a production schedule for everyone, knowing this is what you have to do every week. So by week 12 out of 15, we'll have a finished film and we can tweak it the last 3 weeks. So nothing is ever quick in animation, but the way the process works best usually is by reverse engineering the deadline and breaking down stages into milestones. And then within those stages, knowing who your crew is and finding out exactly what needs to be done. It's very tedious, it's very, very precise. We're working a frame at a time here, literally. So it is the most insane way to make movies ever. That hasn't changed, even with digital technology and making things go faster and working on your laptop or whatever. It still is the most insane way to make films, and in a good way. You know, all my students are crazy, so am I. We love it.
Okay, I think, well, let's, go ahead. Someone raise their hand, stun the crowd here. Come on, amaze us with your question. Yes, sir.
Just what he just was just saying about breaking stuff down into milestones. I did a little freelancing at Cleveland Clinic with media productions there. That's the same way they operate in a lot of ways. They do the same thing. But I just had one quick question about the hard drives breaking down. And on the Macs, on the Final Cuts, would you say they break down quicker for Final Cut 10 or 7, or does it make a difference?
What do you mean? Like the hard drives failing?
Yeah, you said after, you were saying something to the regard of hard drives going out, you had a...
We was talking about Avid, I think.
I was. So I had,
Oh, you
in
did
that
say-
situation, I had set Avid up on a personal computer that really wasn't set up to handle it, and I had no redundancy. This was 2004, 2005. I had no redundancy. I didn't do it right. Like I like to blame Avid, it's fun, and I really didn't know how to use the program. It sounds cool in my story, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I mean, the hard drive failure is the same.
A
between
lot
the two.
of that has to do with, once you get over 80% on a hard drive, you're doomed for failure. Because you're not gonna hit a contiguous space for something to go in there, and all of a sudden it's gonna have like files that get corrupt. And then you keep pushing it because you think you got that much more, and then and that's really what it is. Just be aware of your space and keep your space
I have a
limitations.
question. Do you work on the same hard drive, your main like C drive that, or whatever Mac is, that your software is installed on? Or do you keep all your stuff on an external drive?
Well, they have separate drives, you know, plenty of separate drives that they're working on, you know, but it's just that, you know, I was just unsure about, I didn't know, I was thinking about the capacity, and I said, well, I know they do a lot of switching, they got extra backup stuff, but I wanted to be clear on that, because I wanted to invest in Final Cut 10, but I found that we were using 7 back then, and we got a lot of new 10 stuff, but I wasn't sure about,
Yeah, those are very different software.
Yeah.
Right.
They're completely different. Like
Right.
7's the end of the line on that
Right.
Final Cut, and then 10 is something completely
Right,
different.
right.
And they
that's what
work.
they end up investing in now, you know, like, so.
But if you're
Well, like
worried
7 was
about
cool, yeah.
your footage, I would say get a mirrored RAID.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
You'll be safe.
Yeah, I have, all my work is on 3 drives, identical. It's all backed up to the same one.
Yeah, you just gotta, I mean, what's the number on the hard drive on like hard drive failure?
Oh,
It's like-
I think it's 5%. Every drive has a 5% chance of failure. And I mean, I bought them fresh from the store, especially that here. I bought a lot of hard drives one year. I think I bought like 40 terabytes worth of hard drives one year. It was our last year on Final Cut. And I bought one fresh from the store. I got it, plugged it in, and I needed it that day. And of course, it doesn't spin. And so it's like, I mean, your 5% failure rate's out of the box. And that multiplies. You know, every drive you add, it just gets more and more dangerous because, you know, there's adding and multiplying if you do it one way versus the other way. One way's better than the other way, so you want to do it that way and then divide by X.
Lots of redundancy. Lots of redundancy.
Question over here?
Thank you.
This is directed to Silas, who I heard speak in music class earlier this week, and thought he was going to respond to John's question about retrospection with this. Could you tell them about how you prepare the idea that you might have a tight deadline, but it doesn't mean you invented everything within that workflow deadline, because you're studying different kinds of music, you're studying different kinds of instruments, you're preparing in life.
Yeah, well, a lot of times for the project, there isn't really time to prepare specifically for that, but just like in my just learning since I started playing music, I've picked up instruments along the way and studied all kinds of different music, all different styles, how to play different styles, you know, what makes a certain style tick and sound authentic, that kind of stuff. And even what's popular in pop culture now, I still study it, listen to it, try and dissect it and that kind of stuff because you never know when it's going to come your way. And I take lessons on instruments. Even to this day, I'll study accordion for 6 months, and then when I get bored, I'll switch to guitar for 6 months and that kind of stuff, and study specific styles within that, and just try and learn as much as possible. Softwares, technology, recording stuff. I read like all the mixing magazines and that kind of stuff for techniques, even biographies with people that I think are accomplished in my field. And that sort of stuff. And I even try and keep up with some of the video technology and that kind of thing too, so I can have a little bit more intelligent conversations with directors if they're trying to explain to me a difficulty they're having or what's going on or whatever in their world. So I guess a lot of learning is the best way to stay prepared, because I know when I get a project, it's not going to be like, we're going to do this film, think about it for, most of the time it's not like, you know, think about it for a while, we'll explore some ideas. It's like, oh my God, I'm hiring you because we got to get this done next week. You know, it's like, most of the time I don't plan ahead. I just throw my hands on the keyboard and start going, and I've learned to trust my intuition, and fortunately I can, but yeah, it's pretty hard to prep for stuff. I read a quote when I was at this last studio I was at. We had deadlines every day. Like at 10 o'clock, I had, you know, 6 versions of a commercial due, and by noon I had a video game track due, and by 2 o'clock I had some TV cues due, and that night I had to turn in some mixes for a movie, nonstop for 7 years. So, you know, learn to work quickly and trust my instincts. We read this interview with a composer. He's like, well, first I get a project and I take 2 weeks to find myself. That was his quote, and I was like,
Who was it?
that's sweet. I don't remember who it was. I'm guessing he didn't last long. I don't know. I'm like, wow, that's adorable. I wish we could do that. But a lot of times that's it. Sometimes you can meet the directors ahead of time and say, hey, you know, what's your influence? What are you thinking? And they'll give you some temp music to think about or something. That kind of helps, you know. But.
Phoenix?
First, thank all of you for coming, and I want to make one comment and a question. I heard you speak the other night at Dr. Baumgartner's Gardens Past too, and listen to what all of you guys have said. Something up here that struck me as two or three things. A lot of things.
Make this a quick comment though.
But the big thing is that you're willing to take advice or information, critique from other people. You depend on the people that you work with. You're constantly into learning things, even if you don't apply them right now. Like you say, you know, you're aware of this or that. And Ms. Damien, I did a little research on you before you came, because I was putting together some information for the panel, and I see that you're interested in like flying and diving and skateboarding and all. But see, that I'm mentioning that because that's the thing about learning experiences and overcoming fears and challenges, and it kind of helps when you apply it to the business world. You know, you can't control everything, so you gotta let it go sometime and let it go. But the main thing I wanted to ask you about, or opinion about, is Mr. Height and Mr. Fleischer in particular, when you were talking about the collaborations with the people, because I heard you talk the other day, you were working with the directors you were working with, like, you know, animation, even though you do the sales and all, at the end you gotta come together with some people and doing it. When you're doing that kind of stuff, when you have to rely on other people, and you're coming up on these deadlines, but do you ever run across issues where you don't trust the people that you're working with? How do you get beyond that?
You can't. I mean, it's out of your control sometimes. For me, in terms of working with, they're not really my partner. They're the people that hire me. So it's their project. If they're not coming through with what I need from them, say like the cut I need to work with, there's only so much I can do, and I'll tell them, hey, you know, if I don't get this from you tonight, I won't be able to have it for you by your meeting tomorrow afternoon. So just so you know, and I try and be a lot of open communication with them. Otherwise, I'm not really collaborating in terms of like with another composer or someone like that typically. So open communication with those people, I guess.
Yeah, for me, I freelance, I have my own company, and I work on other films. I worked on a colleague's film where I did like 65 VFX shots, green screen shots, and did some animation in it as well. And it's really great being on the live shoot and being able to make some suggestions that really make some huge changes to the film and the way that the effects are going to go down the film. So it's nice that they trusted me and my experience and respected my input on the live shoot, especially when, you know, animators usually we stand back and watch, but I was allowed to be pretty vocal to make suggestions that, no, you can't do that with the camera, it's going to make my work 100 times harder, whatever. As far as me collaborating and hiring people on my projects, I usually work with people I have experience working with before, even if they're students. I've worked with these students for a year or two, and until this film, my film A Tooth Tale that's showing in the festival here, I've never hired students to work on my films before. This graduating class was just so above the bar that I knew what they could do. I just took them from working on a 9-month project onto doing animation and cleanup for mine. So I knew what I was getting. One of the things I love working with is the composer, the person who's doing the score for my film, because it requires almost no work on my behalf. I just spot it with him, the music comes in, I make some suggestions, we're usually on the right page, and I feel terrible when I tell him that this whole section isn't working. You got to scrap it and listen, this is what I'm going for here. But the best thing about collaborating is that you end up working with people who make you look good. Seriously, who make you look better than if you would have done it yourself. Much, much better. So that's why I love that. I love my colleagues. I get so inspired by all my colleagues at Columbia because they're all working professionals. They all go out there, you know, whether it's a live action film, motion graphics, documentary, narrative, feature film, shorts. I have them all there, and we really support each other. You know, you can't work on a project for any length of time without getting too close to it. And you need people who can see it with fresh eyes, and you need to collaborate with people who are going to make you look better. So that's always really important.
And I think when you're working in this industry, you will not find unprofessional people because those people will not last. You mess up on one job, you're probably not going to get another one. People talk, and you know each other, and you know if they're around and they're not on time or they're messing up, they're not going to continue to get work, and they'll just trickle out. So you will find in this industry the people that last are the ones who are the most professional, you know, who do a good job.
And in terms of going into a project where like lack of trust, which was kind of like how do you break through that? I think first of all is get as much information out there between both parties from the beginning. Like for us, like, you know, there's times where, you know, it's just like make sure that everyone is on as much of the same page at the beginning as possible, and really pay attention to your gut as you're going into a project too. You know, it's like, because you're going to have to make that decision sometimes, like, I don't know if we're in the right place, but how much do I need this money? That's, you know, that's a very important question to get through, because sometimes you might have a client that you know you're not facing 100%, but you have to do it. For your own survival, you have to do it. And so when you get through that, when you get to that place, it's try and keep the communication as open as possible. But then there's just that, like, you know, got to keep yourself as intuitive to what other people are doing as possible. And if you start hitting that trust place, then it's just you got to get your head down and get through that one project, and then try and use that to make just different decisions as you go on. Because really do trust your gut with the people you're working with.
You have a follow-up?
I'd like to add one more thing that you reminded me of, and you just now. I guess I have worked in a couple situations where, you know, I've been doing it for maybe scoring stuff for like 8, 9, 10 years, and I'll work with a first-time director. And I'm only bringing this up because I know a lot of you are going to be first-time filmmakers or whatever. And it is really important if you can hire somebody that you trust that's been doing it for a while with some experience. If you say to yourself, I should trust this person, to trust them and let them, you know, do what they do and make you look good. And if you think that they can, then let them. Because the only time I have had, let's say, trust problems are when I'm working with a fresh director, producer, and they just keep second guessing everything, and honestly just it suffers in the end. The project and the music suffers, and because ultimately, you know, I'm doing what they want, they're hiring me, so of course, you know, I'll do what they want. But if you can hire good people that you think you trust, well, trust them to do their job and be grateful that you can hire them.
It's a good way to close. I know there's many more questions. We're at a time limit here. And like I said, we're going to have time where you can come up and talk and ask questions. So I think we're about to that time period. Should we have our questions out in the hallway and cleared for the next thing, or can we stay right here?
Yeah,
and,
no.
all right. So first of all, let's thank our panelists here for sharing. Good job. I appreciate it.